Good evening, and welcome to another episode of The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Perry.
And I'm your host, David. Tonight we're talking about Season 4, Episode 6, Rejoined. Before we continue, you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube as The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast.
That is correct. And as I say every single week, you should find us and follow us because we are awesome. We're a pretty good time. And I think we offer some pretty interesting things that you might not have considered before. And maybe you have, but either way, you get to hear it from us and our sweet voices. And then you can tell us about it as well. You can find us obviously anywhere that you listen to podcasts, as David has just listed, also YouTube, and of course on Twitter, where we try to be as interactive as possible. Now, brief update about the never ending Twitter saga. It seems like briefly I did have access to our Twitter account, but then that has gone away. There seems to be this uproar about blue checks, and it's causing some kind of issue with content verification or whatever. I didn't understand the whole thing that came out. All I just knew is one minute I had access and the next I didn't. So I'm trying to get that sorted as quickly as I can. I do apologize for any particular delays, but we're working on it. All right. So, but in the meantime, you can still find us also on Facebook, and we post there pretty regularly as well. So before we get into this episode, did want to give us a quick chance to catch up with one another. So David, how has your week been?
It's been good. Work's been good. As I mentioned last week, I was about to start reading Altered Carbon, which was based on that Netflix show. Or, I'm sorry, the Netflix show was based on this book. So I finished
Hmm.
it this week. It's another example, like with The Expanse, where I think the show, by giving the show writers a chance, gives them by giving them a chance to go at the story a second time, allows them to work some kinks out in the story and actually make some improvements. I know a
Hmm.
lot of times people say the book is better than the movie or the show. I think this is an example where the show. I mean, I watched the show first, so
Hmm.
I'm one of those people who, in this case, maybe it's that I saw the show first, but I really do think that they were able to keep most of the plot intact from the book, but make a number of improvements to keep you more invested, make the villain more interesting. And so I like the book quite a bit. I've already ordered the second and third ones. Looking forward to reading those, seeing if they're as good. And I'll probably watch season two this week or start season two this week. And I'll have an update for you there.
Cool. So yeah, I do remember that you talked about that before that you were reading, and I had also watched the show. Loved the first season. Didn't love the second season quite so much, but I never actually went and finished all of the second season. So I need to go back and do that. So I think that perhaps when you get there, I will join you.
Okay.
I have not read the books. I don't know anything about the books, but I mean, I might check those out at some point as well. Um, but yeah, I have wrapped up the third Expanse book, final or fourth Expanse, whichever one we're on.
Third one.
We were
Third
reading.
one.
Yes. Okay. I've wrapped up the third one. I am basically kind of taking a break from the series because I wanted to get into the H.P. Lovecraft book that I got here. So I'm probably gonna, go that direction for a little bit, at least get through a couple of those short stories, and then we can kind of circle back and touch base on the Expanse and the show as well. Um, for those of you who are Sharia Aghdashloo fans, Christian Avasarala fans, you should know that she's in the new movie Renfield, which, even though it's a Nick Cage movie, I still feel like I want to check out, if only to see her again, because
Yes.
I'm not going to deny that I love this woman. I think that she is fantastic, and
You're not a
the
Nick Cage fan. That's what you're saying. You aren't necessarily a Nick
yes,
Cage fan. You wouldn't go for it for Nick Cage. You're going to go
no,
for her. Yeah.
no. And for those of you who are Nick Cage fans, why? I was gonna say, like, I don't begrudge you, but I kind of do. Like, why? Like, objectively,
I had a
why?
friend in college who loves Con Air. Con Air was his favorite film, which is also the one where Nick Cage puts on a real bad Southern accent.
A real bad Southern
Yeah,
accent. A real bad Southern accent.
but I think the reason Nick Cage is either well, it is beloved by anybody is because he commits fully to his roles. Not the bees, not the bees, the bees. Like, he gives it his all, and that's what
I remember
you want actors who give it their all.
I maybe, but I mean, I remember there was like a time there where it seemed like Nick Cage was in just about
Oh
everything,
yeah,
and he just and I never thought that he was good. Like the things that he was in, they were good in spite of him. Like they had every reason to fail, and yet for some reason they pulled it off. Like that National Treasure nonsense. I have no idea why that was a successful franchise at all. Whether there's like three of those movies.
two.
Again,
There's
whatever. Why? There shouldn't have been, but why?
two.
Um, Gone in 60 Seconds, which was nothing but a colossal name drop across the board. Every person in that movie was a bigger star than he was. And it was just like, but he was the central focal point, and it was just like everyone else was literally doing the heavy lifting there because he was awful. Um, what was it? Ghost Rider is another series that he was in. How many of those are there? Two, three? I don't know.
There's two of those. Yeah.
See, again, I don't know. I just keep thinking how does he keep getting work? I don't understand it. And now here we are, and this is some 20 years later, because Gone in 60 Seconds came out in what, 90, 98,
Dude. Yeah.
99, something like
Yeah.
that,
Yep.
So, I mean, and he's still at it.
Yeah.
So maybe there's just something about him that I'm not seeing. And the crazy thing is, I end up at some point seeing his movies. I think I saw Gone in 60 Seconds in the theaters.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, every other movie I've seen, it was on TV already, or someone else had it or whatever. What was the other? The Rock was another crazy movie that he
Yeah.
was in
Yeah.
with Sean
Ron
Connery.
Connery. Yeah. Oh yeah.
And again, heavy lifting by Sean Connery in this movie. All right, heavy,
Michael
extensive
Bay,
lifting.
man. Michael Bay
Yes,
movies. Lots of explosions.
Jesus,
Lots of car
lots of this,
chases.
right? And Ed Harris was the other person. Again,
Yeah.
but
That's right.
lots of
That's
heavy
right.
lifting. They were struggling pulling
Yeah.
that movie out from the dumpster fire that it was definitely headed for.
Eh,
Um,
the way I look at movies like that is like I'm just there for the fun, the action. I'm not there to treat it seriously, but
I try to be, and then of course there was, who can forget Face Off? The billing for Face Off
oh
alone would
man.
make you think that this movie was like top tier apex
Yes, it's
90s.
a
That movie,
meme at this point.
yeah,
Yeah.
movie came out what,
I want to
95,
take his
96.
face off.
And if you think about it, it makes absolutely no sense, because
No.
even
Yes.
if it was
Yes.
possible to do the thing, the underlying
Your
musculature and
bone
facial
structure.
structure, bone structure would not make you look like the other person to that
Exactly.
degree. It
Yes.
was it was that crazy time of, we don't know how science works,
throw a
and
throw a sci-fi
yes,
concept at the wall, see what sticks.
exactly. We're
Yeah.
gonna do this, man, and we're just gonna smash through
Yeah.
on this thing, and that's pretty much the '90s. I think that's why I'm so fascinated by the '90s, because so much of it just doesn't make sense. Like when you really sit down and think about what you're getting ready to watch and experience, a lot of it you're just like, what were they on that got them to this point? And
Right.
that movie really does sum it up. Like, yeah, Face Off, and you thought this was gonna work. And again, Nick Cage, John Travolta.
The
Personally,
doves, man, the doves. I
yeah,
think that's who is that director who always does doves in his films? I think it's the Asian guy, but I can't remember his name at the moment.
uh,
But
I don't know,
yeah.
but yeah, crazy run for Nick Cage for sure. All that to say, if I see Renfield, I will be seeing it for Sheree. I hope she has a substantial part in the movie, because I'll be very upset if she's just in it to be, you know, I don't know, whatever she is, and then she's only in it for like 10 minutes and she's gone. I'll be highly upset, which is probably why, even though there's a part of me that wants to go and see it in the theater because I know that contributes to her success and everything else, part of me doesn't want to, because I feel like I'll be severely disappointed. She's in the movie for 3 minutes, she dies, and then that's it. Now I have no more charade to see or look at or listen to, and I've got to suffer through the next 2 hours of Nick Cage trying to figure out how to act for the first time. I I don't want to do it. So no.
Man. All right.
So
Maybe
there.
you and I can go see it again, like we did John Wick 4 a couple
You
weeks
know
back.
what? I'll be willing to go see it when it hits the dollar theater. All right.
Let's
So
do that. Let's do that.
all right. Otherwise, my week has been pretty uneventful, working stuff, trying to get some things together. I'm still slated to go to that training in June in Houston, so I'm pretty excited about that. Looking to really kind of expand my professional opportunities here and obviously make some more money. So, guys, who knows? In a couple of months, we'll be able to do some other things here with the show. Speaking of which, unfortunately, we were supposed to be announcing our contest winner on this episode, but we don't have one. So David is now here. If you're watching us on YouTube now, you can see David modeling an example of the mug that you could have won.
Yeah.
We would have allowed you to pick your color, of course, but David was just showing you there. So just a simple thing that we are doing, simple little giveaway, completely free, no big deal. But no, apparently you guys have enough mugs, and that's fine. You got enough mugs. We'll just, we'll keep it. We'll keep it ourselves. And maybe we'll bring this back in, a couple of months or something. I don't know, but no winner this time. So we're
You
just
still have
gonna
a
move on.
chance. If you're out there, you have a chance.
No, you don't have a chance. It's
Oh,
done.
it's
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 over.
done. You
It's
lost your
over.
chance. Never mind.
As of this broadcast, it's over. I'm sorry.
You
I'm
had
deep in.
5 weeks,
Right.
and yeah.
You had a long time. We talked about it every week, and I'm kind of petty and deep in my feels. So no, it's done. We're not gonna do it. You have to wait until next time.
Yeah.
All right. So to that end, we've taken care of all of our housekeeping, and it is now time to turn our attention to Star Trek Deep Space Nine in the episode Rejoined here in the fourth season. So this is a very interesting episode to say the least. This is a very controversial episode to say the most. And we're going to get into all of it. Now, I know I normally ask David if he would like to do the recap, but in this instance, I'm going to do it.
Go for
I'm adamant about doing the recap in this episode.
it.
And since
Okay.
and the only reason why is because there's a lot here that we want to go over and talk about, and I want to make sure that we have time to do it. So I've been practicing my summation of
Ah.
the episode. Okay,
Oh,
that way we can get to things.
let's do it.
So without further ado, the summation. In this episode, Jadzia Dax is reunited with a past wife, and they kiss, talk about potentially getting back together, but they don't. The end. That is a succinct summation of the episode. If you need to know more, go watch it. Or you can just listen to us here because we are going to get into it. But that is the highlight. You don't need to
That
know anything
is
else.
so true.
There,
That
you
is
don't need to know
exactly right.
that's it. You don't need to know anything else from us if you've already watched it because you know what we're getting ready to talk about. But that is the highlights of the episode. She's reunited with an ex-wife. They kiss. They talk about getting back together, but they don't. It's sad. The end. There is no B plot. All right.
None whatsoever.
So let's get into it. David, as this is the first time that you have watched this episode, what are your first impressions? What were your first thoughts when it was done and you kind of sat back there for a second with the episode off? What did you first think?
Oh man. I all right. So we'll just jump in there. Not a fan of this episode for both plot reasons and for reasons outside of the plot. Um, so I'm going to just start by saying this. In our day and age, the opinions I'm going to express are not the popular ones. They are not the ones that are politically correct, as was experienced at the time, but things have changed since then. So no surprise there. Um, Frankly put, everything was revolving around the kissing scene, and so the plot suffered because that's, in my opinion, all that they cared about and all they cared to show, and therefore everything had to revolve around that moment. And it was intentionally controversial, intentionally offensive to people who would say that that's objectionable material, such as myself. And so when I was watching the episode, I felt at times it was predictable because I felt like they were going in very obvious directions with the plot. And then when you consider that the plot as presented is a cover for the issues at play, we'll just keep it
Hmm.
simple at the moment. Um, it meant that I felt like I was watching it because that's what I mean. I'm committed to watching the show. It's not like I was throwing up my hands in disgust and I'm done with and I never watch this again. I'm not like that, but I I wasn't a fan. And we can get to more into that. Again, I have reasons. I have plot reasons to not like all the things that happened
Yeah.
outside of other reasons, but my first reaction was not to enjoy this episode. So
All right.
that's my first reaction. Yeah.
So now I will say before we start seeing a flood of potential comments here or whatever it is, guys, if you are a fan of Star Trek, you have to agree that Star Trek is all about uh, communication and the social discourse, right? We cover Star Trek has always covered cultural and political issues of their respective eras. That is probably never going to change, nor should it. If you are a fan of this show at all, you should recognize that the basic founding principle of the show is that we need to learn how to discuss matters with one another in a open and civil manner that will allow us to at least respect the other person's opinion and perspective regardless of whether or not we agree with it. Okay, so we're not going to be shutting anybody down. We are not going to be participating in any of that kind of, like, I guess, cancel culture nonsense or any of that stuff. We are here to discuss, we are here to debate whether or not you agree with me, whether or not you agree with David, whether you have your own opinion entirely. That is perfectly fine. But we will not have any kind of, this is dumb, this is how dare you, like any of that stuff, not doing it. Star Trek has always been about being open, being inclusive of all mindsets. Okay. It's only when people start to try to enforce their mindset, enforce it on others, inflict it on others, when you start to trot upon another person's right to their individuality, that's when we have a problem. So we're not going to do that. We will be discussing this episode, but we will not do those other negative things. All
Yeah.
right. So
If
there.
I may just quickly say, Cisco's response in this episode to Dax, he says, "Whatever your decision is, I am your friend. I support you."
I'll
Perfect
back you
response.
all of the way, is what he
Yes.
says. That's
Great
great.
moment. Highlight of the episode, hands down. Cisco once again knocks it out of the park,
Yeah.
despite
And we're
anything else I might have to say. So
in a slow forward progression of accepting and moving into an openness of gay and lesbian people in society, in culture. It seems like the 90s kind of was like our hotbed tipping point for a lot of that. Okay. I can recall that, the infamous don't ask, don't tell doctrine was established in the military. I think that was in the 90s, 92, 93. Bill Clinton signed that. So whenever his presidency was, I'm not
mhm.
really sure on the
Yep.
initial date there, but that sounds right to me. So that being a big thing, I know a lot of states were doing things to enact laws that made discrimination based on sexual preference orientation became illegal in a lot of states throughout the 90s. It wasn't overnight. This is not a bam, it's 1990 and all of a sudden this massive wave of legislation hit. That did not happen, but it was kind of in short order. You can track it, like, again, 93, I think, don't ask, don't tell went into effect. Then 94, 95, 96, several states enacted various laws and statutes to protect gay and lesbian people from discrimination. We also start to see an uptick in this culturally. A lot of television shows start to deal with the fact that they have characters who go from being closeted gay figures to openly gay figures on the show. I, if you've been following us along on our uh, podcast here, I was, very much engaged in watching ER for a long time, and one of the characters on that show made that transition from a closeted character to a openly gay character on the show. Again, all during the 90s. Um, Probably the most famous person during the 90s to kind of come out and kind of spearhead a lot of this was Ellen DeGeneres. She had her own television show called Ellen. And on that show, she eventually comes out as gay, and there was a huge backlash for her doing that. And that show was canceled. I believe it was on ABC. Um,
Sounds right.
Way back when, and it was canceled. And then that subsequently led her to kind of like being kind of the face of the new LGBTQ movement. And obviously she had a huge success as a with her career and doing a lot of things since then. And I think I don't know if I know she doesn't do a show anymore. Um, but yeah, I mean, obviously she had a good the next 30 years of a run behind her, kind of not just being a openly gay person, but obviously she did a lot for that community and the involvement and so forth. She even won or was awarded the Medal of Freedom by Barack Obama. So I'm not really sure when that was, but obviously it was when he was president. So there. So yeah, there were a lot of changes that happened in this particular community during this time. Star Trek again is always reflective of the time in which it was filmed. This has been evident since the founding of the show. We can go all the way back to the 60s. First interracial kiss being aired on television was on Star Trek, the original series between Kirk and Uhura. Every show has had their thing, their moment. Okay,
Right.
so this is no different in that vein. Here they were trying to tackle a social issue, and even by the creator standards, the writer standards, they still feel like they didn't quite hit the mark here with nailing this as a successful representation of a homosexual relationship. Okay, so I will say that out there. Even the writers, creators have said they don't feel like they quite got there. Um, So, to that end, now I want to talk some more about the actual things that we see in the episode. And what did you? I wanted to ask you, what did you think of the ending when Lenara Khan, who plays the
Current
real
host.
scientist and current host of the Khan symbiont? So this is now where we get to see another symbiont, because now we've only really ever dealt with Dax. Now we have another one,
And
Khan,
all other trills we've dealt with have not also been
joined.
joined with a symbiont. We've always met
That's
people who
correct.
might be, applying to be one at some point, or we went back to the home world, the Trill home world for a time, but that was to investigate a Dax's symbiote and an issue
Hmm.
there. Yeah, this is the first time we've experienced someone else other than the episode from the Next Generation, which introduced Trills as a species.
Correct.
Um, so you're asking what my what I felt at the end. Um,
Yeah, like the end, like just I'm not talking about just anything other than yeah. There's basically Dax comes to Lenara and says, "If you get on that transport, I know that you're never coming back." And at the end, we see that Lenara gets on the transport. Do you think that yeah? Do you think there was a good ending or not? Do you feel like there should have been more to that part?
well, what I would say, and again, this is maybe what I would say is that because most every episode has to return to the status quo by the end, it makes sense that yes, nothing ultimately happens. The end of this episode could have is the same as the end of the last episode in the sense that we're still on Deep Space Nine, other than Worf joining the crew and the Dominion being the main baddies that we have to face. I mean, there have been changes, of course. The Cardassian relationship with Bajor has changed over the season, so there are changes over time. But in general, most episodes end the way the episode began. Is the status quo is returned to. So I'm not surprised that that's what happens. But for me, that's also an example of why I lost respect for Dax in this episode for Jadzia. She is the threat that these two that Khan and Dax have is that if they engage in a rejoining it's not rejoining, I guess it's what's the word,
Reassociation.
reassociation. If they engage in a reassociation, that is considered a taboo behavior by joined Trill. You're not supposed to associate with previous lovers or relationships in new hosts. And Jadzia straight up ignores all that advice I'll say it now. I lost respect for her for several reasons. One, Benjamin Sisko warned her and gave her an opportunity to avoid this temptation, and she said she could handle it. And yet, every opportunity she had, she ran toward the temptation. Now, I'm
Mm.
talking again. I said earlier, I have in the episode reasons to be upset with how this episode went, and outside the episode reasons to be upset. So in the
Yes.
episode itself, Jadzia is not truthful with Cisco, or at the very least, she was not honorable enough to admit to herself and to Cisco that she was going to have a problem. She ran toward the problem with full tilt. She barely. I mean, she brought Bashir along for as a chaperone once, and that was basically it. She does, I guess, when Khan comes to her room, say, I don't think we should have this conversation. So she's not like completely running toward this temptation of hers, but she doesn't do a whole lot to stop herself or put a lot of barriers in her own way. She says to Khan, "Hey, why don't you give up your entire life and be exiled from Trill to
Mhm.
join me? I already live basically a free life here on Deep Space Nine. What am I really sacrificing? Not much." She's not sacrificing much for this relationship, but she's asking the other person to sacrifice everything else. And then finally, I feel like Jadzia is sacrificing the Jadzia part of herself to a previous host. The previous
Okay.
husband of the Khan symbiote is the one who had the emotional and the physical relationship with the previous host of the Khan symbiote. And therefore, that is the personality that is basically kind of running everything. I mean, now to be fair to Jadzia, she can make, I'm not saying that she was like possessed by that character and she doesn't make any decisions for herself and that
Mhm.
she doesn't that the relationship between these two characters doesn't develop within the episode. My point is that I lose Jadzia amongst everything that happens in this episode,
Okay.
and I feel like that's a problem for Dax in general. The only thing we know about Dax is that she is a symbiote, or she's a Trill with the symbiote, and that she knew Cisco in the past. And I feel like the show has had a trouble establishing her character, and this is another instance where all that really is interesting about Jadzia is the fact that she is a Trill who is associated with the Dax symbiote, and that's what drives the interesting parts of her character as far as the show is concerned. And so, again, for this episode, it wasn't Jadzia, for example, it wasn't Jadzia who was the one saying to the other person, "No, I am a new person and I am moving on from that relationship for the best of my symbiote or whatever." She's the one who is following her passion, her feelings. And again, within the episode itself and with outside the morality of the episode, outside the episode, that rubs me the wrong way.
Mhm.
So I know you were saying, what do you feel at the end when Khan is leaving? I was not surprised because again, we're returning to the status quo. I didn't want them to. I didn't want Dax to run off. I want her to be a part of our crew, and I didn't want her to stay because I don't know much about this character than the fact that she's now the current host of a previous Khan symbiote's host, all that jazz.
Mhm.
So yeah, I know it was a lot. I threw a lot out there.
There,
So
yeah.
yeah,
So you're absolutely right, and there is a lot here, and that's kind of why I was like, I'm glad there is no a plot or b plot to this story, to this episode, because there's a lot that we have to unpack here. So, um, again, kind of the another term for this episode, or another phrase that's been used for this episode, has been, things like, you know the gay episode that wasn't, right, because while it does feature a same-sex kiss, that's not what this episode is
that's
actually
exactly
about. And so
right.
when people
Within the
kind of,
context of the story itself,
yes, that's
yes.
not what and so when people, kind of latch on there, and the controversy surrounding the episode, it's always one of those things like, the kind of the phrase that we hear a lot with other things, and I'm going to use it here for this episode. It's like, uh, tell me you didn't watch the episode without telling me you didn't watch the episode, right? If your main takeaway is, oh, that's the gay episode, then it's clear you didn't watch it, because that's not what this episode is actually about.
Right.
Um, Now, I completely agree with you on this, on why you would say that you would lose respect for Dax, because this is probably the quintessential Trill episode, because we are dealing with two different symbionts, and we hear now kind of the whole crux of what it means to be joined. What is the purpose of being joined? And it's told to us right at the beginning of the episode when we find out about Lenara coming to the station, and there and it's Bashir and Kira. They're talking in quirks, and he breaks it down for you that
Yes.
the whole point of being joined is so that the symbiont, not the individual, not the host, but so that the symbiont can experience as many different varied forms of life as possible, different
Right.
lifestyles as possible. Okay,
Yes.
that is the point, and that as Jadzia herself has explained, and this is what Cisco reminds her of via what Curzon said to him, that each host is just a link in the chain, and that it is their job as host to give this experience onto the symbiont, and the symbiont must learn to let go of that past association and to embrace a new life. Now, we don't know what the end goal of this is. The one thing we don't really know about the symbionts is, you know, are they essentially immortal? Because the way they talk about them, it sounds like they are. It sounds like they can just exist forever as long as there is a stream of hosts for them to be implanted in.
Right.
I don't know. We don't know if like there's an end goal where the symbiont itself kind of goes through a metamorphosis of such and becomes a different type of being, and then has amassed all this knowledge and experience or whatever. We don't know any of that, but we do know that based upon Trill society, the most important thing to them, especially if you are a joined Trill, the most important thing is that the symbiont survives and moves forward.
Right.
That experience, that lifetime, that wealth of knowledge moves forward,
Right.
progresses. When you reassociate, you are basically stopping that process from occurring.
Right.
You are keeping the symbiont stagnant in a pattern of life that it can no longer gain anything from.
Right.
That's why it's the taboo. They talked about how there were other symbionts that had done this reassociation, and they were exiled. So
Right.
whenever that host went to wherever it was they went and died, that was it. No one was there to take that symbiont back to the Trill homeworld or any of that stuff. The symbiont died, the host died, all that knowledge, all that history, all of it gone.
Right.
And we also know from previous episodes, Dax is not, obviously, she's not the first host of, or Jadzia is not the first host of Dax.
Right.
There are at least 8 that we know of. There are at least she is Jadzia is the 7th or 8th host. And
Right.
even then they're not really 100% sure on that, because Cisco has said before in the past that he believes that she is the 7th, but there have been times where they've been talking, and when they'll do a count, she'll throw out some other random names. So it sounds like, regardless of where they fall on this, again, at least the Dax symbiont is extremely long lived. It's been passed around a lot of times.
Right.
Now, we also know that some people have died prematurely, like Tarius, who was kind of a focal point in this story here. He was a shuttle pilot who crashed during a test run. So we know that he, died pretty young.
Right.
But that doesn't mean they all did. We know that the first Dax host lived to be like 80 something years old, too. If we take that into consideration, the host itself could be upwards of 300-400 years. In fact, I do believe in the lore it does say that at the time that we meet Jadzia for the first time in the pilot episode, that the symbiont is 328 years old.
Yeah. Right.
So a lot of experience here, a lot of history here
Right.
that is accumulated in this one small form. And
Right.
now here comes Jadzia, and she is going to potentially um, destroy all of that history.
Right.
She's going to walk away from all that history and live a life in exile and die. And everything that we know about the symbionts, Tarius, Emily, um, Duran, Curzon,
Corazon.
all of them will now be gone because Jadzia made the choice.
Right.
And it flies in the face of everything that we know about Jadzia, because nothing was more important to her than being joined. We've heard that again and again. She washed out of the Trill Academy, reapplied, rededicated herself, passed on the second go through, and became a joined Trill. And now she's gonna throw all that away. Like,
Right.
that was a part that I also kind of like, that stood out to me, because it was just like we just learned all of this stuff and how important it is, And for Jadzia, who was obviously at one point seen as kind of a pinnacle, that she was slated to be a trainee for an initiate, even that she's just suddenly going to walk away from all that for Lenara Khan.
Yeah.
I don't know. I didn't buy it. Now I did buy the parts where they were talking about where Lenara and Dax were talking and they kind of got caught up in personalities, right? And they were having a difficulty distinguishing between being Lenara and I
The
forget the
previous
other one.
host.
The
It starts with an
previous
N,
host.
right? Doesn't it?
Yes. Is it Niala? I
Something
want to
like
say it
that.
was like that. Yeah. And then versus being Jadzia and Tarias.
Right.
So there's a lot of back and forth there, and I could totally understand. There are strong emotions there. Again, a life ended prematurely. That I think that more than anything would have been an interesting facet for them to have to deal with for the trill.
Right.
How do they demonstrate that kind of control when there was a person who had such a bright and vibrant life that was cut short, and they remember obviously right up to the point of their death, because even Jadzia says Tarius feels so bad
Correct.
because his wife advised him to not go on that mission, to not fly that ship, and he did it anyway
Right. And he
and died,
regrets it,
and he
as
regrets it.
Jadzia Dax says on behalf of Tarius. He is sorry. Whatever part of me is still Tarius, I'm sorry that I ignored your advice.
I wish
And
I had listened to you. Right. And that kind of interplay of he said, but I said, she said, but I, that Nalani is the name. Jesus, that was killing me.
yeah, I knew it was a
But yeah,
name.
yeah. So that back and forth interplay, I understood and I
Right.
actually really enjoyed. I like seeing
Yeah.
how it kind of messed with their personalities.
Right.
But again, that goes back to the initiate training. They have to
Right.
learn to control those strong emotions. And
Yes.
the
That's
fact that this
exactly
kind
right.
of flies in the face of all this for Jadzia up to this point, that was the troubling part for me because it was just like that's not the Jadzia that we have come to know up to this point.
Yes. Exactly. And I just want to reiterate that I feel like this is just another example of the show having a problem of nailing down what is Dax, what are Trill, what's the differentiation between the characters, the host versus the symbiote, the previous host versus the new ones. You know, we had that episode where Curzon was embodying Odo, and Curzon expresses he was romantically attracted to Jadzia as when they were and like how are you hosting someone else's thoughts and memories and that person had romantic at least attractions to you, like the the mind all of that just doesn't seem like it would meld very well together. But again, in this episode, I'll put it very directly: the lesbian kiss was the drive of the episode. That's the they on TV. It drives controversy. It was what I wanted it to show. But because they're using the sci-fi element of the symbiotes as the taboo part, it's not that they're two women having a relationship that's the objection. It's the symbiotes having past histories that's the objection. The show tries to have both its cake and eat it too. It wants to have the same sex suggestion, and there's no in universe objection to that. We're in art. I mean, the show had controversy around that part of it,
Mhm.
but within the episode itself, it's about the symbiote. And as you just pointed out, Jadzia was the person who should have already at least addressed some of this on some level. She is
So
supposed to have gone through training about this sort of thing. Sorry, go ahead.
no, I just wanted to correct you because what you said was actually not true. The episode was not about the kiss. That was not supposed to be the focal point of the show. But due to when this episode was filmed and obviously the promos going out for it, this was a spot that was used, was teased in the promo. So like if you could go back and watch this particular commercial for the promo for this episode, it showed Lenara and Jadzia close, and we know from watching the episode, we know the scene where it eventually happens, but the
Right,
promo did not show it. It
right,
teased it. And
right.
because of that, it kind of became the sensationalism of the show for this particular episode. But that was not the driving force of the show. This episode was truly supposed to be about a rejoining of a lost love. That was kind of the point. It was not supposed to be any kind of statement about gay, lesbian, anything. That was really not it. In fact, it became, when they released the promos, it became such a big deal that at one point there was another uh, entertainment team, like one of those Entertainment Tonight, weekly shock drama, sensationalized shows. You know what I mean? Those kind of entertainment news
Yeah. Hmm.
programs. They wanted to film the scene. They wanted to film the scene and just kind of use that in their own promos and stuff, and kind of do like a behind the scenes of it and whatever else. But the director refused to let them. And who was the director on this episode? Avery Brooks. That's right. Avery Brooks did. And Avery Brooks said, no, you're not going to do it. And if you go in and if you look at any of the background information about the episode, you again will find that the, they did not want to treat this necessarily as an episode about making a statement about gay and lesbian rights or anything like that. They were trying to make a statement about past relationships coming into play in the present, and that message definitely got lost in the fact that this was um, a same-sex kiss. Okay, um, but to their credit, or I guess to Avery Brooks's credit, they talk a lot about how he really did a lot to not just direct the scenes, but also to kind of direct the flow of information and things like that on the set during this time. He really controlled a lot of aspects that were going
Right.
on behind the scenes on this one. And the actors claimed that it actually made the filming of the whole episode, and in particular those scenes, a lot easier to do because he made sure they were comfortable with what they were going to be doing and representing, and so forth. And so yeah, once again, shout out to Avery Brooks for being just a awesome person, apparently, for taking care of his colleagues and getting them to kind of get through this very difficult um, episode and time, because obviously this got the show a lot of attention, and unfortunately, a lot of it was negative, considering what they were filming and presenting.
Right.
So, so I just want to throw that out there. But yeah, that was not the point of the episode. It kind of became the point once it became known what they were going to be filming and everything else, and the message overall got lost and became, oh, Star Trek's doing a gay episode. No, not necessarily. This is kind of a genderless, in a way, a genderless situation, because it wasn't supposed to matter that Lenara and Jadzia were both women. This was about the fact that they had had a previous romantic association, and they were now together once again, and they were the will they won't they of the continuation of that being the problem. So that's it.
Well, um, so it's interesting you say that because what I'm reading on Wikipedia seems to suggest, from what I'm reading, that the homosexual angle on the relationship was certainly in their mind. So again, I'm just
It
reading from
became that. No, it's like I'm saying, it became that when they initially started this. That was
right,
not the goal, but it became that. And
right.
as the sensationalism kind of took over, and then powers that be, producers and stuff, get a hold of it, and they're like, hey, there's no such thing as bad publicity. It
Right.
became that, and but
Well, my
even to this
point though
day,
is that it
yeah,
became that. So I'll just read real quickly what I'm seeing here on Wikipedia. This is
yeah,
in the writing and directing notes for the episode. In Echevaria's first draft of the story, there was no lesbian element as Dax's former lover was male. The Trill taboo against uniting relationships for past hosts was suggested by Pillar early on in the creation of Deep Space Nine in order for the society to prevent an aristocracy of the joined, where joined hosts never met anyone they did not already know. It was Moore's suggestion to make Dax's former partner a woman in order to tackle the taboo against homosexuality by way of the on screen taboo against reassociation. At that stage, they intended to make no reference in the story to any characters having a concern about Dax's relationship with the woman as to focus the story. So, that, for me,
right.
that's what I was critiquing earlier by they wanted to have their cake and eat it too. Because I do think that within the universe of Trill, yes, it is an interesting idea to explore. Whether even with the same sex element, what does it mean for these previous for the symbiotes to have relationships through new hosts with past relationships. You know, the whole that
Yeah.
whole thing is
Yeah.
definitely interesting and worth exploring. If they had decided to go with the original concept of a male partner for Jadzia's character, you could have had that angle without going with the same sex angle.
So
Now, I'm
wait.
not just
No.
hold on, let me
Okay.
finish.
Okay.
I just want to say that yes, this makes the episode more interesting to bring in the same sex element. But for me, again, the problem is that they're um, I didn't believe that it was Jadzia attracted to this woman because
You
she
thought it
Jadzia was
was
attracted to the current woman. So let me put it this way. If you want to tackle these same sex elements, I feel you should go ahead and go after the same
okay.
sex elements in a story where that is the focus. And if you want to focus on the symbiote element of it, you could have done so without bringing in the homosexual element. Now, again, it makes the episode interesting to have it done this way. And I'm not saying that it wasn't interesting for that reason. I'm saying that there were problems within the episode itself that I had, and
Yeah.
then outside of it. But from what you said, that they weren't thinking, or at least it wasn't the focus. They were trying to focus on within the episode itself. You're right. Within the episode itself, the episode is focusing on past relationships and how the Trill deal with that. My point is that the context of the show on the outside seems, from what
Yeah.
I'm seeing and from what I just read, that that was something they had in mind, and even were willing to put front and center. And I would say that the whole point of like the promos didn't show the kiss. Well, of course they didn't. They were trying to tease that there might be. Therefore, you have to
Right.
watch the episode to
The
see if it happens.
sensationalism. Right. The
Right? Yeah.
sensationalism.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so all I was going to say on that was, again, Ronald Moore came up with using a woman for the role because there was the thought that, excuse me, the objection to the taboo would not have been as strong if it was a male playing a potential love interest for Jadzia. So if the Dax, or not the Dax, but if the Khan symbiont had stepped off the transport and was a attractive man to go through this whole thing with Jadzia, they felt like the objection people wouldn't have understood as much because they'd have been like, oh well, I mean, they could be a good couple together. That's so sad. They know so much about each other. They, all of the compatibilities would have made um would have made it more difficult to justify the decision at the end to leave. You would have
Right.
had more people being sympathetic to the standing of the relationship versus the utilization of a woman. It made things stand out in more stark contrast because it's like, okay, this is exactly why, yeah, exactly why we don't allow for these associations, because it flies in the face of the need for the symbionts to move out. It made it, especially considering the day and age and where it was filmed, it made the, I guess, the taboo aspect of it more apparent.
Right.
But when you take that into consideration, again, tied in with the sensationalism of the kiss, I think it loses that overall message because all people focused on was the kiss. And even to the point where people were writing into the show, there are several people who talked about that someone, wrote in or called in or whatever and complained saying, you're ruining my kids by making them watch two women kiss like that. I mean, and why I find that so funny and why I wanted to bring it up is because this is the same kind of objections that we've heard about different aspects of Trek since forever. So whenever anybody talks about Star Trek not being a controversial show, I just love bringing that point up because I'm like, again, here it is, 1995, still dealing with this, and here we are, 2023, all the new shows that we've got out, and it's still an objection.
Well,
So
I
for
mean,
all the,
yeah,
you know,
as you've told me, again, I'm not sure how much I knew this beforehand, but
yeah,
like in the original series, Kirk kissing
Nichelle
Uhura,
Nichols,
right?
Uhura, yes.
Yeah, so on
Oh,
screen
they were ready to
interracial
shut that.
kiss.
They were ready to shut the show down for that
Right.
one. That was like that was it. It was like I cannot believe this made it onto TV. What's the world
Right.
coming to? Star Trek is over. Like
Right.
that was that.
Right. And for me, and again, you've watched the original series, so tell me if this is true. Part of me feels like, okay, good, it was on screen. I mean, I interracial kissing is not something that I think is objectionable. Therefore, great, fine. My concern is that Kirk is kind of known for being a womanizer. Was he just going through a hurrah because he goes through women like, he goes through underpants? Like
Now,
how serious was this
so
kiss?
So in the episode, and this is one of those things that always gets debated too. In that particular episode, he is actually forced to kiss Uhura. The episode is called Plato's Stepchildren. For those of you who want to go back and watch the episode, and basically the situation is that the Enterprise arrives on this planet where people have. Not only stopped aging, but they have, through just living on the planet and eating the food and being exposed to the environment, have developed certain powers and abilities, and they've kind of set themselves up as kind of some like a neo Roman culture. And so they've got these abilities and everything else, and they basically decide that because they're bored, they're going to subjugate the Enterprise crew to whatever humiliations and games they can come up with. So using their mental abilities, they force the crew, certain members of the crew anyway, to do things. Like at one point, they make Kirk and Spock act like ponies, and then there's another part where they like make Spock do a weird dance, and I think he kicks Kirk in the head a couple times, and just a bunch of random, like crazy things, basically to demonstrate they have power over them. And so, and when they get to this particular point where the kiss is happening, they have made Uhura and Chapel, Nurse Chapel, beam down from the ship. They've dressed them in their, kind of Roman Greek clothing ripoffs, right? And then they have made them reenact this particular love scene that they've come up with, however they, whatever it is. And in the scene, they make Kirk kiss Uhura. So that's how the kiss comes around. It's not that he wanted to and that he was
Okay,
aiming to do it or anything like that. It's because these things forced him to do it.
gotcha.
And so that's why it always gets kind of kicked around as, is this truly a kiss that should be celebrated, considering it was done under duress? The characters didn't want this to happen, blah blah blah.
And it never
But
happens again, I assume.
it does not happen again. It never happens again. They don't have any kind of romantic involvement whatsoever
Right,
after that. But yeah, that's kind of how it gets debated a lot. But to me, I just say again, regardless of how it came around, it's still the first interracial kiss that was aired on television. Like you
right,
can say whatever, debate the finer points of it if you want to, but that's still the case. It still is this particular kind of kiss. So it's still important to
right.
be featured on a primetime television show during the height of the, race riots and civil rights and all the rest of it that was going on in the 60s. So yeah.
Right,
And
right,
so I think this was kind of maybe a step in that spirit in the 90s. They're looking back and it's now been 30 years, 30 plus years, and we're having our own kind of pivotal moment here regarding, again, regarding equal rights for people, equal rights and representation for people. And I think that Star Trek was trying to kind of do the whole two birds with one stone thing here. They
right,
wanted to have this particular story, but they also wanted to kind of put themselves, again, in that kind of sensationalized zeitgeist that we had going on in the nation at the time, revolving around gay and lesbian rights and relationships. And I feel like they did a better job of representing this when we listened to Kira talk about her opinion of love and relationships. Because Kira says, very early on, she's like, I don't understand how two people who love each other, fall in love, and establish a life together can now face such a cultural taboo for wanting to continue their marriage, continue their life. Like that was, I think that was the closest that we got really
right,
to any kind of stance on gay and lesbian rights for the 90s,
right,
right? Not anything else that comes after it, because everything else can really be cloaked under the whole Trill Association issue. But that would have been a more interesting thing for them to explore if they had done it that way, but they didn't.
right,
So that's my little take on that particular part of it.
right,
Um, Overall, on this episode, though, um, the episode doesn't do anything for the rest of Deep Space Nine. I was going to say it's a bottle episode, but it's not a bottle episode considering the fact that, we use that term bottle episode kind of incorrectly. Bottle episode was always supposed to mean that it's considered a bottle because it's a one set, a contained set. It's a
Yes.
cheap episode to film. It
Right.
doesn't cost much. This episode was not that. There were a
No.
lot of CGI effects in this episode. We're on the Defiant. We've got Dax walking on force fields, which is really cool. To see there's a lot there. So this is not a bottle episode in
Right.
that regard.
Right.
If you want to extend the term, it is in the fact that it does nothing to change the status of the greater world that we're in for Deep
Right.
Space Nine.
Right. And I'm glad you mentioned the whole wormhole bit because that's another instance, two instances of actually I feel like Jadzia made some mistakes. She's the one who suggested they use the stage 4 drone or whatever it was, and that apparently
Mhm.
the shielding on that is what causes the explosion. So was she trying to show off? I mean, there's the question of was her judgment impaired, and then she risks her own life and the life of the entire crew by refusing to vent the plasma or whatever. Which again, we're on a show where we want our guys to succeed, and failure is pretty rare. So I'm not surprised that they were successful in saving Khan, but part of me is like she was told by was it Middleton, the guy, the other guy, what's his the
Eddington.
Eddington, that's it. Like we can't go save her, and she's like, give me 10 seconds, and I was like, that took longer than 10 seconds.
Oh
You
yeah,
walking across that.
TV time. TV time is amazing because I
Oh
mean, 10
gosh,
seconds is definitely 2 minutes. Like, just
yeah. Again,
yeah.
John Wick 4, him
Oh my
climbing up those
gosh.
stairs and fighting
Yes.
off every assassin known to man, and he has
And
like five
somehow,
minutes to do it
yes,
and does
five
it in
minutes, and that
30.
5 minute, yeah, I was gonna say 5 minutes became 30, like really quick.
No joke. Oh my
Mhm.
gosh. But
Yeah,
anyway,
TV time is way different. So I never subscribed to that at all. When she said that too, I was like, okay,
yeah,
someone start the clock. The ship should
yeah,
have blown up at least 15 seconds ago. But
exactly.
go ahead.
Exactly. So I just, I mean, to put it simply, I think that there is something there about reassociation for the trill. And we could address that issue without going into the controversial aspects of a TV show in America in the 95 in 90s in the 90s. But I feel like they chose to go with the controversial element so that they could be controversial, and I don't think that that saves the episode from the problems that are experienced within the episode. And so I'm not a fan of this episode.
Yeah,
So
no,
yeah, that's my summary.
and that's fine. I mean, and again, no one's gonna like every single episode. I mean, we haven't. We'll get there because I've got some in my head already that I'm thinking of. That are like, you know what? I watch these episodes out of sheer dedication to my level of Star Trek, not because they're great episodes. So
Surprised you
we'll
haven't
definitely get
mentioned
there.
"Move Along Home" yet to me yet.
I was trying to be respectful. I was trying to be respectful, but since you brought it up, um,
Yeah, now I
yeah,
brought it on myself. I brought it on myself.
yes, you did. I
And
was trying not to.
I want to say that part of the reason I mentioned the fact that I read Altered Carbon this week is because both the show and the book address similar issues. I mean, the idea of the book and the show is that people have a chip in the back of their neck that basically uploads their personality and their all their memories, and you can take that chip out and put it in a different body. And so, what
Mhm.
happens when you are put into a body that's not your own, and the body dysmorphia? In the book, there's a woman who was who went to prison. Effectively, prison is basically they take your chip out of your body and you're not allowed to have a body for like decades or centuries, and then they put you back in a new body and it's not your own, and it's kind of terrible. It's awkward at the very least. And this woman in the book, she comes out and she's put in the body of an Asian woman. So she's a blonde woman initially, but she comes back out and she's put in the body of an Asian woman, and she goes home, and the main character allows her to have a night with her husband who had missed her. And she comes out the next morning saying, I feel kind of dirty. I feel like he's cheated on me because this is not my normal body. But I also feel like I've cheated on myself because I just had sex with my own husband with a body that's not my own. And so there is in the show, she doesn't come out as an Asian woman. She comes out as a man. She comes out as a man and goes to her husband and is having to present herself all over again, but not as another woman, which removes the whole like, homosexual angle. What happens when your wife comes home in the body of a man? Do you love her and all that in the body of a man? Do you have objections to that? I'm not attracted to male bodies, therefore I can't make love to you. what and then the show doesn't ever really get into the finer details, but it presents that stuff. And then similarly, the peripheral presents the idea of what's what is it like to be put in a cyborg body that's not the same gender as you are.
Mhm.
So I feel like it is something we could address. I just don't feel like this episode did it very well.
Yeah. And
So,
it's interesting that I guess to me it's interesting that we see these types of questions come up. I mean, really a lot more in sci-fi, especially when it comes to the whole, you know, future world stuff, right? The year is 2609 or whatever it is, and things are happening. It's the year 4000, right? And we're so far advanced and removed from our understanding of culture as it is right now that these things are, commonplace, and having to um you know answer the questions that you were just presenting has been a thing of the distant past at this point, when they've come to these technologies and these innovations and lifestyles and everything else. All of those questions are ancient. Or yeah, they're ancient by now by the time you're dealing with it in the world that you're reading about, like Altered Carbon, like Star Trek, like whatever, like these are social issues that were solved a long time ago. And I always just find it so I always call it interesting. I always find it interesting because they treat it with such triviality, because that's what it's that dismissal, that casual, oh, we dealt with that. But we're here now.
yeah,
We haven't dealt with it yet. So I just want to know, like, how did you deal with it? What did you do? And I think that's always going to be the part that is intentionally left vague, because we don't know.
right,
We don't know how it's going to be dealt with. We don't know how it's going to turn out or anything like that. So,
right,
um, and I would be very interested to read the fiction of someone who finally wrote that and basically filled in the dots. Like, what was their proposed solution, how we got there. You know, and I often feel like in the few that I would consider that get close, their answer is often annihilation, right? Like, it's always, oh, the world is so great and everybody has all their stuff and we're a utopian society, but we got there through we damn near annihilated ourselves, and the population was decimated by some 900 billion dead or whatever it is, and we had to rebuild, and now that we've wiped out whole generations, these things just don't matter anymore. Like, that tends to be the solution that's presented in that. These problems that we had no longer became problems because a very much larger problem presented itself, which almost killed all of us, and through the need of survival, all that other stuff dropped away.
right.
And uh, I don't necessarily like the idea of annihilation or whatever, but I'm just saying I do like this. I guess the know how to describe this. It's we talk about like first world problems, and I feel like this could be classified that way a little bit. We have to kind of extend the metaphor a lot here, if you just follow me. And what I'm talking about is when all of your basic needs are met, right? And then even when the next level after basic needs are met and you're to a point where you want for nothing. I feel
Right.
like people come up with things to argue with, disagree with, fight over, that they wouldn't fight over if they had other things that were concerning to them, right?
Fair enough. Yeah, I agree with that.
And so yeah, so like when you're homeless or living out of a van or whatever that is, I have to ask myself, like, does that person care that so and so is on TV and uh, is homosexual? Probably not. When all your concerns are survival, do you really care whether or not someone is a Democrat or Republican? Probably not.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, like, So that's what I guess that's what I'm getting at. So maybe that's why those thoughts are always so interesting when we get to these future whatevers, because it seems like the solution is always if we reduce everyone down for a while to a point where basic survivability is all that we know for existence for a while. By the time we get back up to that point of utopias, opulence, and so forth, we will have effectively eliminated this thought of let's hate someone because they're different. That seems to be how it plays out. And that could just be me. Maybe I'm reading a little bit too much into it. I don't know, but that's just kind of what I see in some of these
I mean, I guess I would
future
express it a little
things.
bit differently. I would say that there are tiered versions of problems in society. And yes, when you're homeless, living out of a van, the problems you're dealing with on the day to day don't allow you to deal with other issues that other people might, with their time and freedom, might engage in. And when you consider how serious someone living out of a van's problems are versus other problems, that puts certain things in perspective. Oh, I'm overreacting to this issue in front of me now compared to what other people are dealing with and what I could do to help them. But I would say there are certainly times when there are issues that are second, third tier issues need to be dealt with. But yes, if they're being dealt with before the other issues are being dealt with, or with the
Or
premise
instead of, I feel
instead
like that
of or
is, I
ignoring,
feel like that's
yeah,
more the thing. It's
sure,
not
yeah,
before, but it's more instead of. Rather
right,
than tackling our real issues, we have now decided to distract ourselves with something that
right.
isn't,
And
doesn't
I
matter.
and my personal opinion about a lot of issues is that a lot of things are intertwined. Yes, there are going to be issues that are third tier, but that doesn't necessarily mean they aren't related to first tier issues. But it doesn't that does not excuse not dealing with first tier issues as opposed to dealing with third tier issues. If you have even complexity, doesn't mean that you ignore primary causes, etc. Um, but yeah,
Yeah,
I mean that's a
yeah,
conversation that could go in all kinds of
yeah.
directions. So
And unfortunately, we don't have that kind of time. I
not at
know
this
that
point.
for yeah, I know that for my life and whatever tier it is I'm on, or however you want to look at it, I personally just go with the whole. If it doesn't affect me, again, if it doesn't affect me personally, I don't care what you do. Like, don't mess with me or my family or my money. Um, because again, like you said, things are intertwined. My money is very personal to me because that's how I support myself and my kid and so forth. And that's just it. But other than that, I try my best to just I guess live and let live. Like what you're doing at your house is what you're doing at your house. It's not what I'm doing at mine, but that doesn't mean that what I'm doing at mine is any better or worse than what you're doing at yours. It's just that's your house. You pay for it. You do what you got to do. I mean, if you end up getting arrested for whatever it is that you do, that's totally on you. Um, that's it. I'm just saying as an example. I don't know. I'm not trying to, I'm just saying I very much believe that I have a choice. I exercise my choice and beyond, as long as what I'm doing is legal and not hurting anyone, then I don't there's no problem. There's no problem. So that's how I kind of go with that's our my guiding force for life is I don't want to cause anyone any kind of suffering, and obviously I don't want to be arrested. So here we go. That's it.
Again, we could follow up on that conversation more.
Yeah,
I could say
yeah.
more, but at this point, yeah, certainly understandable, and nothing much else needs to be said there. So, wow.
No, so yeah. So final thoughts on this episode. Would you say that this is one that everyone should watch, regardless of how they feel about it, or no? Do you think that this is it's all right, but it's skippable?
I guess it'll depend on what you're wanting from your watch. If you're wanting, as you said, this episode doesn't necessarily affect future episodes. So if you're watching it, it's for the full experience. It's for what was the ramifications of this episode outside of the storyline within the story itself. Again, the controversy that it engendered outside of as a TV show. If you're watching it for just straight up plot, you could skip it. I would say again, I feel like Jadzia as a character is let down by her actions in this episode. Um, but that I mean, if you want the full character, if you're following the Jadzia storyline, this is essential. This is very important for her. So
Mhm.
I guess it really depends on what you're wanting from your watch. What are
Yeah.
you trying to go for? So
I would agree. As someone, as and for especially for us, as we pointed out many times this episode, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of Jadzia focus a lot of times. So if you are looking to kind of understand Jadzia more, understand the trill more, you definitely must watch this episode. As for the rest of it, not much. Although I would say special nod to Avery Brooks for again presenting Cisco as being this, you know, he's a steadfast friend and supporter, and got to give a shout out to my man Worf for being so funny in the beginning with his deadpan delivery of "What do Klingons dream about?"
oh,
We
yes,
we
that was
didn't get to
hilarious.
really get to talk
Dream,
about that, but that
yes.
was great. Yeah,
You
it's
don't want
better
to
that you
know.
don't know, right? That's
Yes,
what he says.
things
It's
that would
great.
make you. What does he say? It's things that would make.
Wake in the middle of the night and haunt your days and whatever else it is that
And
he
then
says.
Kira says, "I don't know if he's
I don't
if
know if
he's."
he's joking.
Yeah,
So it's great. It's a great
yeah,
moment.
yeah,
Once again, proving that there is something about Worf that even when he's on, just there minimally, he
right,
contributes in such a way that you're just like, again, memorable.
right, exactly.
Um, but other than that, I think we've kind of covered everything here in this episode. If you agree with us, let us know. If you don't agree with us, also let us know. Again, be respectful, be polite. This is all about debate, social discourse. We're not trying to harm anyone. We're just, talking about the episode, giving our opinions. It's not to say that we are right in any of this. If there's something that you feel like we overlooked or maybe we oversimplified or whatever it is, I would love to hear that and maybe even engage with you on that a little bit. But we're certainly not going to just dismiss anyone or try to enforce our ideas on anyone. You don't have to accept what we say or anything like that. But
No
again,
exiling here.
right, exactly. We are not here for that. We are here to do in the finest of Trek traditions. We're here to talk, man. That's it. We're here to
Yeah.
talk. So go with the conversation. But as always, you can find us and follow us on all the social medias. You can also listen to us anywhere you listen to podcasts. I happen to do it on Spotify. And until next week, where we'll be doing more of this, take care of yourselves.
Thanks again, guys.